Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do: to educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. All right. Welcome to the show today, everybody. So today is a little bit different and what I would consider a special treat. My very close friend, Danny Coleman, has a new podcast called the Take Care Podcast. It is a podcast dedicated to the science of psychology and leadership and coaching. And I don't know if you know this, but Danny and I, many of you should know this, but many of you perhaps don't. Danny and I are co-authors on one of my favorite books I've ever authored, partly because Danny was the co-author on it, and that's Next Level Tribe. That book is definitely a book that you should check out. It is all about how we connect and manage social relationships. And Danny and I have been very close for a long period of time. He is my brother. He's my ex-brother-in-law, but I still consider him my brother. We've remained friends for a very long time. I've known him since he was 15, so it's going on, close to 15 years now. And I consider him, we always joke, our friend circle, that Danny, to all of us, is sort of the social genius amongst us. He is able to connect, to make friends faster than anybody, and he's just an amazing person in that realm. And so he has amazing skill set as well. So I really just love that he has a new podcast. And this particular episode is Danny basically having me on his podcast, and then we are essentially swapping. So I just decided to play this podcast on my podcast. So without further ado, let's get into the show, and I hope you enjoy this one. And make sure you check out Danny's new podcast, Take Care.
All right. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Take Care Radio. Got a very special guest here today, my man, Dr. Jade. Dr. Jade Tita. Dude, I don't even know how to intro you. We can shout out. We can shout out the Next Level Human podcast. We can shout out you as an author. We can shout out you as an old school personal trainer. Whatever you want, man. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me. And not only that, it's like we have our relationship is difficult to express to people as well, right? Like, it's like, I consider Danny one of my best friends. He's also my ex-brother-in-law, and I've always called him a brother since then, and still call him a brother. We've done books together. We've lived together for a long time. I mean, we're essentially extensions of each other to some degree. Anyway, I love that you have a podcast now, man, and I love that I get to be on it. So excited to be here, and obviously love you, bro.
Yeah, man. And I didn't give you any heads up what we're going to talk about, as that's our typical format. Just throw stuff at you just because you're so good off the cuff. And so we'll definitely go into a couple of different things. But do you understand? Do you know what my pod's about, man? Do you know Take Care Radio? You know the premise of it?
I mean, in general, but why don't you just go ahead and enlighten me so the rest of your listeners can also hear,
Yeah, so I just didn't want to blindside you, but basically it's really a soft skills coaching podcast, right? So it's about more of the elements that deal with client retention, client compliance, like stuff that we all deal with as from trainers to coaches. And I actually have a lot of managers that listen to the pod too. So it's really just it's like a leadership podcast. You know all the stuff I love, which that's why you know what I thought, actually. Yeah. So communication, leadership, like charisma, psychology of change, all that stuff that I love. That's really what we're talking about. And we're talking about it in a coaching capacity. So we'll talk a little soft skills today, man. I know you love that stuff too. And actually that's where I wanted to start. I think the fortunate thing for me is that I know you so intimately that I can pull out some questions that maybe you don't typically get asked. So I'll set the stage a little bit. Jade graduated as a naturopath went to a Bastyr Medical School out on the West Coast. And one of my favorite things about your experience that you share with me is that you took a lot of counseling courses during your time there. So I would love to kind of start there, man. First of all, you're going to school to be a physician. Why were you so fascinated, and why did you engage in so many counseling classes? And then we'll evolve into some of the strategies you took from that.
Yeah, well, because you and I talk about purpose all the time. And sometimes I oftentimes say that our life gives clues to our purpose. And I remember being, like, no joke, in elementary school, sitting at the lunchroom table with a little boy who was crying over in the corner. And I remember getting up and walking over to him and sitting down, and me having a discussion about his home life or whatever was going on that was making him cry, right? And so this is like, I must have been, no joke, 6, 7 years old. But now fast forward into high school, I was the go-to person when everyone had a problem. I was always the person who, seemed to be able to give advice intuitively, and people asked me for advice intuitively. And then in college, I bartended, which again was fascinating to me because you got to see all this sort of behavior of people in the bar. And that was very psychology driven. And so it made sense. By the time I got into medical school, I didn't realize Bastyr University was a very unique medical training. And when I got into the clinic, I don't even think I realized the first 2 years, which is basic sciences. I didn't realize that when we got in the clinic that we'd even have the opportunity to do counseling. And not everyone did it. I think we all had to take at least one course, one shift in counseling. But once I saw that they offered counseling as part of our curriculum and that I could sort of specialize in that direction, I immediately was like, yes, please. And in particular, I did couples counseling. And so if you could imagine, I'll just set the stage for everybody how this worked in a medical setting. Very much like, the detective's room where, they're interrogating a witness and you got the two-way mirror. You could see into where the counseling is going on, but the person being counseling couldn't see all of you. And there would be a group of us, counselors in training or physicians in training, watching through this two-way mirror as one student counselor sat there with the people that they were counseling, either a single individual working usually on romantic stuff or a couple. And then the attending physician or attending psychologist, he was a PhD in psychology, would be behind the glass with us. And we'd all be watching the counseling session sort of going on. And so I took, I think, 4 shifts in counseling. I took every time I had the opportunity to take another shift, I took another shift at Bastyr and accumulated enough hours to become essentially a counselor. And I never actually went forward and got that certification, but I could have gotten that certification in Washington State as the accumulated amount of counseling that I did in that shift. And to answer your question about what drew me to that, I think it's the same thing that drew me to that little child sitting at the lunchroom table, the same thing that made me interested in human behavior in high school, the same thing that drew me to wanting to bartend and seeing that as a really cool way to do it. I've just always been interested in human behavior and saw psychology and human behavior as where the rubber met the road in terms of how we humans show up in our lives, whether we are happy or sad, whether we feel fulfilled and joyful, whether we have contentment or whether we are anxious, depressed, don't feel like we belong, etc. I was just fascinated by that. I was fascinated why we do the things we do, why some people feel like they belong and they don't belong, why we suffer the way we do, why one person goes under one form of stress and is just devastated by it, while another person can go through the same form of stress and be enhanced by it. And I've always been fascinated with that. And that's where you and I really share in our career. We both And this is what we wrote, Next Level Tribe on together as well. That this idea that human relations and human connection is sort of key. And I know you'd spend a lot more time than I do on human connections and human relations and organizations and leadership skills and stuff like that. But I've just always been fascinated with that stuff and continue to be a lifelong student of it. And of course, the final thing I'll say there is that this is one of the places that many, many people, because we all study this all the time, every single one of us should have a PhD in this field, because from the time we're young, we're connecting with people, and we have to become experts in emotional intelligence, in social IQ. And I'm always amazed that so many of us aren't, because we get bad sort of influences. We don't get taught this, which is why I love why you're doing this podcast, because we don't formally get really taught this anywhere. And if we are around the wrong kinds of people who don't have good skills in this, who are socially inept, we ourselves can be socially inept. If we're raised by parents who are not really good socially, we are not that good socially, right? So this is sort of one of these things that sticks on us by the people we hang around. And I've always been fascinated by that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's where we connected big time early on. Because I remember when I started personal training, that's when we were roommates. And I was always interested. I go, why do some people stick around and some leave? And these are people with very similar backgrounds, right? Maybe they have the same job. Maybe they have the same family life, or at least on the outside. Maybe they, live in the same subdivision. All these similarities. That some people would disappear after 2 weeks. Some people would linger for 6 months. Some people would get great results in 3 months. Some people would work with me for 3 years and not get any results. So I was always interested in that sort of gap. Why does that sort of thing happen? That's exactly right. It's the start of this podcast. And so what were some patterns or strategies that you have from back in those days that still stick with you today? Because you are probably, dude, you're the best coach that I know. And a lot of it has evolved outside of health and fitness now. It's been more relationship, career, purpose type stuff. But I think that's always been a little bit of it too. So what kind of insights can you share that you really adapted either from your education and experience counseling, or just maybe something that you just have always practiced and don't know where you got it?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think the first thing is it's this idea. I've always, and I think I picked this up from my mother. You know, my mother. My mother is an incredibly warm person, a person who is very aware and very able to meet people, whoever they are, and accept them. And that to me is the first rule. I have this rule that ultimately what we humans want more than anything else is we really want, in social situations, we want and have a strong need of belonging and acceptance. And so one of the things that I have learned right away is that most of the time when you're interacting with somebody, the natural default is, because we all want that. I want it too. But the natural default is, because we want it so badly, is we come over the top trying to prove our worth to people. And we end up talking more, listening less. We end up trying to prove ourselves to people in an attempt to get sort of this subconscious, sort of a connection and approval from the person we're dealing with. And what I discovered early on, and probably because I had really good role models, my mother and my father, really good socially, and I know your parents also are very similar to this. One of the things I realized that my mother did, and that I naturally just picked up, and once I understood what it was, I was like, oh, you do this naturally, and you probably do it naturally because of your mom, and it's this idea that whatever someone is going through, we need to meet them and make them feel human within that suffering. Because what happens is people feel, A, that they're not human and they're weird and something is wrong with them. And therefore they start to feel like they don't want to share it, because they feel like if I'm not human and I'm weird and I'm sort of different from everybody else, then I'm not going to be accepted. And this is sort of the pattern that goes on. And so there's an awful lot of sort of social jujitsu that people do to try to keep people from seeing their real selves, because they don't feel like they will be accepted. And so one of the first things I have always done is just say, dude, that's normal. Dude, we all do that. I mean, you relate to people in that way. First of all, you just let them sort of talk, but normally it's not until you say that, right? show them that you see that they are just a normal human struggling with pain and dysfunction the same way we all struggle with pain and dysfunction. As soon as you do that, I feel like it opens up a doorway into a person's soul. All of a sudden they get to go, okay, I'm not going to be rejected here. Okay, I'm just like Jade or Danny or everyone else. And okay, I can now begin to have a real conversation. And most humans, unfortunately, do not allow the people they are talking to and the people they're engaging with to feel normal and accepted. And therefore, before you even start the conversations, you're already in a subconscious, subtle battle of who's going to get the most attention. So that's number one. And then the second thing is this thing that my mother does as well, which is she subtly self-deprecates all the time. Meaning that not in a way that takes away her power, because self-deprecation is a tricky place. If you give too much of your power away, people can sometimes pounce or not show respect for you. But she may just subtly joke about herself or say silly things about herself, like, oh my God, I'm not great with words, or, sometimes I get the wrong words. And, it's kind of that pratfall effect that they talk about in research, where if someone goes up on stage and if someone's perfectly polished, some people will say, oh, he's a good speaker. But if they make a mistake or a couple blunders, people will like them more. And this is that idea of self-deprecation. So my mom will self-deprecate, but also simultaneously compliment. And not compliment in a way that's brown-nosing or false. She literally will find things that she genuinely likes about a person and compliment them. And so those two behaviors, one, the whole thing of like, you're normal. All of us humans suffer and have dysfunctions. I'm no different than you. I know people just like you. I've dealt with the same thing. That piece. And then two, a slight self-deprecation to lower your own status while complimenting to subtly raise the other person's status, so that you kind of get in this place where you both can see eye to eye. All of a sudden, now this person loves you and they don't even know why. Right. And now they want to listen to you and they have no idea why. They just walk away and go, I just dig that person. I'm not quite sure why. Well, the reason why is, one, you made them feel normal and heard. Two, you raised their status and made them feel equal to you. And that just opens up. To me, that's the opening gambit of any great social interaction. Because from that point, now this person, whoever they feel or whatever they are, can really meet you as an equal. And I think that's ultimately what humans want.
Yeah, so I'm glad you went there, dude. We're going to go. I was going to do like some rapid fire things because I think you do I picked out a couple things that I noticed that you do and I wanted to highlight them. And number one was the making people feel human. And I don't think that we can understate how important that is, especially in a coaching interaction where the power dynamic is inherently a little uneven. You're the expert and your client is coming in and there's this gap where it feels like you have a higher seat. And if you can lower that seat and be like, hey, this is a collaborative process. This is your life. This is your diet, whatever it is. They are much more receptive to engage in the coaching process, take your advice. And that's something that you and Jill did for me in spades. I remember when I first moved to North Carolina with you guys, I couldn't do anything right. Dude. Any bad decision someone could make in college, I made the decision and I got caught. And that's when Jill was like, just come live with us, dude. And I didn't remember feeling like this at the time, but in hindsight, I was really embarrassed about everything. I was really ashamed. I was constantly trying to like you said, kind of put together this character out in front of who I wanted to be, but didn't feel like I really was. But when you guys made me feel like, dude, everybody has done stuff like that, or everybody has felt insecure, or everybody has messed up or felt embarrassed or ashamed, all of a sudden it started to feel more disarming. And what happened? I started to engage and ask you for advice more, or I even gave myself more compassion. And the research on self-compassion coming out is really, really cool. Everything from increasing willpower to motivation to confidence, all these things by just letting yourself out, not beating yourself up, but it started from you and Jill. So that was the first one I wanted to start with. The second one is I would love for you to talk a little bit about the Morpheus Effect. So this is something that you coined, but correct me if I'm wrong, Jade, and expand on it, but it's essentially the idea, like you kind of see potential in people that they don't see in themselves. Yeah. Is that something that you sort of just always had again, or something that maybe you observed and developed? But talk a little bit about the Morpheus Effect, what it is and the power of it.
Yeah, this is funny, man. How like certain things like this gives me goosebumps to talk about this because I do think, how like when someone says something to you that they say you have this superpower, right? And inside you're like, wow, I really do. And it kind of shocks you and you're just like, damn, that's so cool. I have that. I really do think this is something that I have that maybe is something unique to me. I do think I have the ability, and I think lots of people, I'm not the only one, but I don't think it's everyone. I can look and see what people are really good at. So for example, with you, even as a young kid, because I met you when you were 15 years old, I could see immediately that there was a strong charisma there, probably developed by, I know your parents, they're very charismatic people, and probably also honed in your years of basketball and sports and things like that. So there was a charisma and a confidence there that I thought was pretty extraordinary for a 15-year-old kid in the composure that you had, right? And so when I see people, what I'm doing oftentimes, and I think this is really important, is I just go, here's a person, I'm an introvert, but I'm very interested in people's stories. I'm more interested in other people's stories than I am in telling them my story. I want to hear people's stories. And I think because of that, that's the first thing that allows me to do this principle, which I'll explain in a minute, because I listen to the person's stories. And to me, your purpose potential, which I use that term to essentially describe the potential of things, gifts that you can give to the world, almost like unloading your special cargo. I believe each of us are here on this planet to deliver special cargo in a sense. That's sort of the way we are here, and we have the potential to deliver this special cargo, and that is purpose. And when I hear someone's story over years and years of counseling, I think perhaps, and years of, even when I was a kid, listening to people's stories, you start to see threads and patterns. So you start to see these things that like, isn't that interesting that this person has been confronted with rejection again and again and again in the same kind of way? Rejection from women, their mother, their first girlfriend, their wife, whatever it is, or they've had betrayal or lots of loss and grief, or lots of challenges to how smart they think they are. You see these patterns, especially you see these patterns in pain, and it's really interesting. And then you see the way that they rise to that sort of occasion and the skills they develop around it, right? So good communication skills, let's say, or, strong sort of level of resilience and being able to bounce back from hardships and stuff like that. So you look at these stories and you look at their patterns and superpowers that came out of these hardships, and you start to see somewhat of like a superpower that's developing. And the reason I call it the Morpheus Effect is there's the movie called The Matrix, which is a pretty old movie now, so not everyone's seen it. So I'll just go through it real quick. But there's this character who is essentially, his name is Neo, and he is essentially like the savior of the world, like this all-powerful, deity type man, like man god. But he doesn't know that he is. In fact, he thinks he's nobody and he's unsure about anything. But the person who discovers him and is this guy named Morpheus. And Morpheus believes in Neo's power so much so that Morpheus puts everything on the line and tells Neo he is the one. He is the most powerful. He's going to save the world. Of course, Neo doesn't believe it, but Morpheus convinces him. And not only the final way that Morpheus convinces him in this movie is that Morpheus essentially gives his life for the life of Neo. And then Neo finally comes to terms with the fact that he is this thing. And so from my perspective, the most powerful people in the world are the people who see other people. Behind every great person there, I believe, is someone who believed in them before they believed in themselves. And I also believe that we humans have to somehow believe in ourselves before anyone else will believe in us, right? So it's sort of like this thing where it's like you have this feed forward sort of process. Maybe you run into someone who believes in you and you haven't believed in yourself, or maybe you start believing in yourself and then run into that person. But it turns into this feed forward cycle, and this Morpheus effect allows you to begin to see who you could be and then allows you the courage to take steps to actually being that. And to me, I love these Morpheus type figures. And it was shocking for me to wake up one day and be like, oh, because I coined this term, I think, by looking at my parents and looking at other people, and then waking up and being like, oh my gosh, I think I might be a Morpheus type person for other people. And what's beautiful about that is then you take that sort of persona on and you start doing it even more. This goes to something that I know you probably talked about a lot, which is this idea that, when we look at research on success, really there's several different elements that really determine success. And while intelligence is important and other things are important, it seems like the most important things are your belief in self, the belief others have in you, and then your ability to rise from failures and faults and mistakes and those kinds of things. Those seem to be the three biggest determinants of success. And this Morpheus principle speaks to at least one of those, which is these people in your lives, in our lives, who believe in us before we even believe or see in ourselves. And by the way, I'll say one more thing here, because I actually believe this goes way more deep than even we might think. I believe it speaks to the most powerful thing in medicine. And I don't know that you and I have ever talked about this before, but here's the interesting thing about this. There is something in medicine that is considered the most powerful element in medicine that exists. And it's basically magic. And every single study that is done, that has ever been done, that is done well, has to account for this magic principle. And this magic principle is called the placebo effect. So if I tell you you're great and you're wonderful, there's a potentially good chance that you will take on that persona and begin to believe in it. It's like me casting white magic on you. And so in a sense, the Morpheus effect is a sociological placebo effect that we get to cast on to other people. Now, there's also the nocebo effect, which is the opposite of the placebo effect, which means if I tell you you're something bad, that also can pull you down or shade you in that, and you may end up believing that. And so this is actually pure magic, and it is something that is the best proven principle in all of science. In fact, it's so proven, we have got to have this in every single study to account for it. The placebo effect is what the Morpheus effect is. And so what I'm suggesting here is, what if you could suggest to people, stop trying to make them see in you what you would like them to see, but suggest subtly to them in your actions, belief, and thoughts around them that they are this greater thing. And maybe, just maybe, due to this, they will become that. And it changes the way that you begin to deal with people, because all of a sudden, if you have someone that your significant other who never does the dishes, let's say, and this is the example I like to use, they never do the dishes. Now, there's several different ways you could do this. You could point at them and say, oh my God, you didn't do the dishes again. You never do the dishes. How come you never do this? I've told you 1,000,000 times. That's the nocebo effect, right? It's basically like, hey, you never do the dishes, and that person is going to start seeing themselves as someone that never does the dishes. They're not really going to be inspired to start doing the dishes. However, if instead you look for any opportunity where they're doing the dishes, even one cup from the sink to the dishwasher, and you just say to them, thank you so much for helping. I love it when you help me do the dishes. You're so helpful, right? All of a sudden, that now plants a seed. And now you have the opportunity to begin to help them see a different way of being. And that is inspiring to people. Telling someone they suck is usually going to just make them suck more. But giving them a glimpse of hope that they can be something better oftentimes pushes them to be something better. Now, not always, and we can talk about how to deal with that if you want. That's not always the case. And certainly you don't want to start brown-nosing people and just making things up. However, I would say this works very often, if not most of the time.
Sorry to break into the show, but I wanted to take a second to cover one of our sponsors and tell you all about Paleo Valley at paleovalley.com. These are the grass-fed sticks that I tell you all so much about, that all of my friends know I have on hand constantly. They are in my car. They are at my house. I keep them at my sister's home and my parents' house. I have these things everywhere because they are the simplest, most convenient whole foods protein supplement you can get. Almost like carrying around pure protein, low carb protein in your pocket. These Paleo Valley beef sticks are the only 100% grass-fed and grass-finished beef sticks on the market. They use organic spices. They are naturally fermented instead of using nitrates and nitrites that can be a problem in some of these cured meats, and they simply taste fantastic. Check out the original or the jalapeno. Those are my favorites. Please make sure you go over to paleovalley.com and visit. When checking out, use the code NEXTLEVEL for a 15% discount. Remember, our sponsors keep the show going by you giving them your patronage and spending your money on these high quality products. You actually do a few things. One, you're helping to support the podcast. And two, you are helping your health. And three, you are making sure that good quality companies like Paleo Valley can be out there doing their business, changing the world, making the earth better. One of the things you may not know about this is that grass-fed organic and grass-finished beef is doing something that is so utterly important for our environment, actually helping to repopulate the topsoil. A lot of people don't know this, but our topsoil is being extremely depleted, and raising animals, especially cattle, the correct way helps to get that topsoil back. This is one of the reasons why I love Paleo Valley. Not to mention it tastes fantastic, but they're one of these companies, like my other sponsors, Cured Nutrition and Organifi, that are doing the right things by the environment. I really appreciate everything they do, and I hope you will check them out. Thanks so much. paleovalley.com. Use the code NEXTLEVEL. And now back to the show.
In psychology, it's called, I don't know what the term for Morpheus Effect is, or if there is one, but there is, instead of the nocebo, they call it the Golem Effect. So basically how you treat somebody is really how they become. That's why it's the old adage of, who you surround yourself with. You're the average of the, 5 people that you spend time with, because when people tell you who you are, you start to shape that box. So it can go one or two ways. And to me, that's the whole point of being a coach. We need to the point of being a coach is to put in the Morpheus effect for other people. Otherwise, what are we doing? And one of my favorite studies is called Cinderella and the Ugly Ducklings. It's from this dude out of Yale University, and he basically just studied thousands of people who were great at something. Not necessarily successful in a financial sense. Maybe they're a great artist or a great parent or maybe they were a great professional, whatever. They were great at something, and he was trying to find this common thread. And for the most part, what he found is everybody pretty much had a normal or pretty much under the radar existence. It's not like they were the best in their class at school. They didn't get voted any awards by their classmates. There were no parameters. There were no clues that this person was going to kind of take off in any area of their life. But the common thread was they all had somebody in their life at some point said, hey, you're pretty good at this. Or, you're kind of better than this in this way. So it was a music teacher or a neighbor or just someone passing by, and they can all bring it down to a single moment that actually acted as sort of a light switch turning point, these lightning strike moments, and everything changed from there on out. So the power that we have to really influence and nudge people in a positive direction, I think, is the whole point of doing this work in the first place.
Yeah, and you know what it's called? I just as you were talking, I remember the term that it's called. There's the Golem Effect, which is sort of the psychological nocebo effect. The Pygmalion effect is the psychological sort of placebo effect. So in a sense, the Morpheus effect is my terminology of the Morpheus effect is essentially the Pygmalion effect. So these things have been studied, the Pygmalion effect, and the research on this would be like the most famous one is taking a group of students and essentially telling the teacher, right, in this sort of double-blind fashion. The students didn't even know, but the researchers told the teacher that certain students were above average and really brilliant students, and that other students were sort of just normal. And really, it was just a random chosen thing. And what they found was the students that were the teachers, or the students who were told that they told the teachers were above average, ended up doing well above average. And it kind of blew the researcher's mind. And essentially what that was going on there is that the teacher subconsciously, subtly believed that about these students, obviously, and put more effort into them. Now you would think, well, why wouldn't they put more effort into just the students who weren't, quote, as smart? That's not how our brains typically work. We're like, oh, this person has potential. I'll put extra effort into them. Well, it goes the same with us. So the Morpheus effect, I would say, is really this idea that once you plant a seed inside somebody, then what ends up happening is they go, oh, maybe I am this. And they start, sort of acting that out. And actually, Danny and I can share with the listeners that we have a very close friend who has a real world example of this. And he is an actor, someone who's been in plenty of movies and stuff that you've probably seen. And one of the interesting things about him is that he was working as a marketing person in his late 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, and never even thought about acting. And one of his coworkers said, you would be such a great actor. And he goes, what, me? And they're like, yeah. And he kind of thought about it. And then he took an acting class and became the standout student in his acting class. And his acting teacher told him, you really should consider taking this on as a career. Then he moved to Los Angeles, started going on, auditions and stuff, and ended up with a 15-year career in Hollywood as a working actor who never had to, most actors in Hollywood have to, they get extra parts and they have to work as a waiter or something like that. He had a full-on career where he basically paid his way doing acting his entire career. I would say that is the Morpheus effect in action. And we have that power as individuals.
I forgot about that study of the kids in the classroom. That's right. I love that study. What about, let's talk a couple counterintuitive things, man. So stuff that most coaches don't really think about, but I think are important. So part of the work, we do with building out the coaching program we did at Metabolic, we get to work with coaches every day. So it's basically like multiplying your coaching experience. So you get to start to see common threads amongst coaches. And so one thing that I've noticed is oftentimes coaches take their clients' results very personally. And it sort of creates different things in different people, maybe a little insecurity as a coach, or maybe just guilt, or maybe they're paying me money and I can't help them. But I once heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I once heard you say that your success rate in the clinic, so where you could actually prescribe and tell people what to do more explicitly than coaching, was right around 30%, which is a great success rate, right? As a clinician, is that accurate? And then, if so, what do you say to those people, Scott? That doesn't seem very good. I'm only helping 3 out of 10 people. That's a lot of people that I'm not helping.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you say that, because I oftentimes tell, when people ask me what I do, they get all excited oftentimes. I'm like, well, I'm in the field of physical development and personal development. Mainly I use metabolism for helping people change their physicality. And I use, psychology and philosophy to help people change their sort of mental, emotional states. And they're like, well, what is that? That must be so rewarding, right? And like, what's it like? And I'm like, well, if you want to fail most of the time with most people, then you would love this work. They kind of look at me and blink. And so I don't know if it's 30%. I just know that all of us coaches understand this. And I believe in just being honest about it. And actually, I see it as a strength, right? Because in all those failures, I never look at it's kind of like the Thomas Edison light bulb thing, right? It's like he had that famous quote where he said, I didn't fail, 10,000 times. I found 10,000 ways that this would not work. And I think that's kind of what happened. The longer you're in this field, you start seeing patterns, and you do fail most of the time, but those failures, each failure is a lesson. So in a sense, slowly but surely, at first I was 10%. And I don't know what the actual percent of success is, but then I was 20%. And then I'm 30%, and probably now maybe I'm 40%. I still fail with most clients most of the time because change is hard for most people. But all of those failures create lessons that then allow you to take these things and help more people. And so that absolutely is the case. I think that we fail most of the time. And I think the reason I love it is because, to me, in each failure, is a really interesting thing to unlock and an insight to unlock, a block that someone has. And the way I say it is that we humans, we have essentially three areas that we get stuck. We get stuck in emotional loops, repeated emotional loops. We get stuck in recurrent obstacles. We confront the same thing again and again, and we get caught up in different psychological patterns. The psychological patterns are stories we tell ourselves. And I never would have learned those three things without all those failures. So now I can go, oh, this block is with someone's story. This block is with the way that someone is feeling about something. They can't get past this feeling. And this block is really about the inability to overcome this particular obstacle that usually comes out of an old story. And I think that has made me be a much better coach, because now I can sit back and go, oh, this person is in a recurrent psychological pattern. Oh, this person is in a stuck emotional state. Oh, this person has never overcome this obstacle and therefore has given up and is essentially sitting next to the boulder that's blocking the road, not wanting to move anymore. And then that allows me to begin to adjust and kind of see, where do I want to focus my attention?
How do you remove blocks? So say you do recognize these blocks. Okay, this is an emotional block. How do you help people remove those blocks? That's really challenging work to do.
Yeah, it is, because, so like once you get those patterns, if you're interested in going down this thread, the way I do this, I go, okay, so this is an emotional. What we don't understand is that we have recurrent ways of thinking because of the stories we tell. So, for example, to give everyone an example, if you believe in God and you're a Christian, let's say, you're going to have a certain way of seeing the world. Okay. Now, and by the way, whatever your beliefs are, fine. This is not making a statement about religion one way or the other, right? Like if it works for you, it works for you, whatever it is. But the point is that if you're a Christian or you're a Muslim or you're a Jew or you're a Buddhist or whatever, that story informs a lot of the filters by which you see the world. And based on those filters by which you see the world, there are only a certain number, let's say 1, 2, 3, or 5, 6 different ways of dealing with certain things, because you understand that through a particular filter. Now, maybe if you take those filters off, and in my work, that's exactly what happens. As soon as you take that perceptual filter off, and this is why I think perception is the first skill to correct in people. Once you change someone's filters and remove these filters, now instead of only having 6 directions you can go, all of a sudden 5 more or 4 more open up, right? If you have all these doors there that you can open, right? You go, oh my God, these 4 just popped up. Why? Because you went to a different part of the room and could see a different door. What happens is the way we believe about things as humans and the stories we tell ourselves, it's kind of like sitting in a dark room with only one part of the room lit up by a strobe light and the rest of the room pitch black. Now, if you could start moving that strobe light around or turn a light on in the whole room, you're going to be able to see all the opportunities for you that you missed before. And so to me, one of the first things you do is to challenge people's perceptions, not because you think their beliefs are wrong, not because you think your beliefs are right, simply because they are stuck. And in order for them to escape that, they need more opportunities than what they believe exist. And as soon as you open up that perception, all of a sudden the whole world opens up. And a lot of times this happens without, I believe that life does this to you regardless. This is what happens with the midlife crisis. This is what happens with not getting the job you really wanted. This is what happens with an injury that ends your athletic career. This is what happens with all these life events that open up new ways of being, that you can't think the same way you always thought, because the whole world you thought you knew, prom, marriage, kids, religion, whatever it is, falls apart. And then you go, oh my gosh, life doesn't work exactly the way I thought life worked. And I better find and spot a new way of being. So to me as a coach, without them getting to that point where they fall flat on their face and hit rock bottom, we're essentially slowly trying to open up the room and show, shine that floodlight into different areas of the room by removing some of the perceptual sort of field there. Because we humans, we are domesticated in a sense, right? And I don't even think in a sense, I think we're domesticated, just like cattle or anything else. We are basically like, go here, do this. And when the sun comes up, we let you out of your barn, you go out, you graze in the field. When the sun goes down, you come back. This is what happens. Like this is how people walk through the world. And then things happen which shatter that whole belief system. And then that gives you the opportunity to move forward. So pain, that's why I oftentimes say pain is a path to purpose. So your question was, how do you remove obstacles? Well, pain does it automatically. Whether you want to or not, you walk through this world, these perceptual awarenesses are going to open up to you because stuff is going to happen in your life that you did not want to happen, that will make you see life differently. And if you're really paying attention and really astute, you will realize that there's an opportunity to live a better, more fulfilled life out of that pain. But as a coach, what we're trying to do is before they get to that pain, we're trying to plant seeds to say, maybe think of it this way. So that's how you do it when there's a psychological block. Now, when there's an emotional stuckness, and you usually can see this with anxiety and depression are two really good ones to sort of look at. Anxiety to me is the inability to make a choice. People simply won't choose because they have never realized there's the existential crisis of freedom. Freedom is this idea that we have multiple things we could choose from. Now, and every choice means we have to forego another choice. And some people get very anxious about that. And so if you see someone who's very anxious as a coach, essentially what you need to be looking at is like they have an emotional stuckness around anxiety. They will not choose. So the idea there is to get them just making better choices and making more choices, saying yes more often if that's the issue, saying no more often if that's the issue, but just getting them to be decisive and definitive in their choices. That's how you would deal with sort of emotional stuckness. And when you deal with the same obstacle again and again, like I have someone very close in my life who constantly gets a new job and then loses that job or, and then has to get another job. And to me, this is an obstacle. So with that, you go, the first step there is getting people to see that what is happening to them is coming from them, right? So that they're the common denominator. So it's not changing other people's behaviors. It's changing your own behavior. If you have an obstacle in your way and you just keep kicking this boulder and this rock, it's not going to go anywhere. However, if you try to climb up the wall and fall down, that didn't work. You go to the other side, try to climb up that wall, fall down. That didn't work. You retrace your steps and try to go around. That didn't work. But then you go around the other side and discover a ladder, which allows you to come back to the boulder, put it on the boulder, and finally climb over. And so the idea with obstacles is giving people that, hey, it's your thought processes and the way that you keep doing the same thing over and over again in this situation. And by the way people are reacting to you and the fact that you keep losing your job and they keep saying the same thing, if you're listening, is a clue to you that it's your behavior and that behavior has to change. So those are the three ways I deal with those three patterns. And of course, as you can see, those three patterns there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done in there. But that's really how I do it now. I kind of look and say, what is this? A psychological, stuckness, an emotional stuckness, or a recurrent obstacle based on a behavioral pattern? And, it's really all patterns. And It does all really come from perceptions, right? And that's why I say dealing with your perceptual filters of the world is step one in any kind of change.
So here's a question for you, dude. When I like this. So basically, it's pattern recognition first. What's the pattern that they're running into? And then it's about helping them see or change their perception of whatever, perception of the obstacle of the emotion. But here's an issue that a lot of people run into, but that you don't seem to run into, though. And maybe this is just experience or just like your teaching or communication style. But if we tell people, hey, you need to, like a lot of coaches get in trouble because they go, you need to look at it this way. So they recognize the pattern. Then they tell the client, hey, you need to change how you see it. But what does that do? The client then goes, actually, no, as human beings, we don't like to be told what to do, right? We like our autonomy. So that's why the advice is typically help guide your clients to see that themselves. Easier said than done. So what strategies do you have? Because you seem to oftentimes help people shift that perspective in a pretty direct way. Like you just say, hey, let's look at it this way. But people are open to that. My wife, Kel, she's all the time goes, well, Jade said this one time, I should probably look at it like this. So one moment around the fire in a July of 2016, it still sits with her and resonates with her. So how do you communicate that to your clients to say, like, without offending them or making them a little bit more resistant to your message?
Yeah, to me, this is so go back to the Morpheus Effect, right? Every human is going to want to tell you their story, okay? And so they're telling you your story. You're picking out patterns. And then what happens, I think, for me is I go, oh, here's their hero's journey. And so what you're doing is you're essentially taking their story. You see the pattern and you kind of see how they can escape that pattern. And what you want to begin to do is tell their hero's journey back to them. And the first part of that is you basically tell them their story back to them. Now, in telling their story back to them, but you tell it in a slightly different way. You don't tell it so much about like, oh my God, that was so hard and, this was bad or this and that. You tell them with a hint of possibility. And by the way, I learned this from, working at Metabolic and working with Mark and Jeff, which you and I do, who are two of the brilliant marketers. I realized that I was essentially doing marketing within my counseling. What I was essentially doing is I was taking their pain and their story, replaying that back to them, but I was planting a hint of promise about something new. Now, I didn't know what the new thing was, and I wasn't going to tell them the new thing, but I was kind of telling them this hint of like, here's what you have been doing. Here's and look at where you could potentially go. And it's kind of it opens up this idea of like, look at what the opportunity that creates. Most people don't see opportunity in failure. They don't see opportunity in pain. They only see victimhood. So in a sense, when you tell them and you give empathy and compassion and you tell them how amazing they are and look at your story, look how unique it is and look at the opportunities that it opens up. To me, that's stage one. So you're essentially just repeating back to them, but not exactly. And in counseling, we always hear this thing is like, so what you're telling me is this, this, and this. So my approach is what you're telling me is this, this, and this. And do you see that this, and this wonderful thing can actually come out of it? Like, here's an example. Someone loses their father, okay? And it devastates them. And they're telling you about this particular story. And I'm telling them back, you lost your father. It's incredibly difficult. I can't imagine what that must be like. It's super tough. And, the next person you run in, one of the wonderful things about this is the next person that you run into who lost their father is not going to have to suffer as much because of your experience. And I kind of just paint that sort of brush and let it sit. And I believe what happens with humans is I'm not telling them think this way or go help people who's lost their fathers.
Right.
I'm just essentially painting them that, do you see that you have this has enhanced you in some way, that you can do good with this? And I just subtly throw that out there and when I'm retelling the story. And I have found that does something incredibly magical for people. In the same way that if you say you are normal, if you also go, you're going to do amazing things with this. Like you can really make someone else's life better. Because I think what it's doing is you ping their pain, you poke their pain a little bit and let them know, hey, he understands my pain or she understands my pain. But then you paint the promise of this pain can take away pain in the world. And I do believe it's a hypothesis. I would like it to be studied. I don't know, but it certainly has worked well for me. I believe that's the nugget of wisdom and purpose. It's like a purpose nudge is what we'll call it. It's nudging them to say, you could potentially choose this as your purpose. And what that then does is open up people's mind. It takes the spotlight and goes, oh, this isn't just about me and my pain. This is about me getting stronger and doing something meaningful in the world. And I believe we humans want a couple things in life. We want to matter and make a difference. And that's what we're essentially doing by planting that sort of seed. And then, in a sense, you can then, once you begin having that conversation, there's lots of other ways you can do this. You can talk about someone else, right? There's another subtle way to do it. You can go, just like I did. I have this friend. Me and you have this friend who started out in marketing and wasn't really happy there. And then someone just happened to mention he might be a good actor, and he never heard of that before. But it was that seed that moved him in that direction. And you just tell a related story that and there's no shortage of stories. Even if you had to, right, you can come up with one from, Harry Potter or there's no shortage of stories to tell people about their potential. And so they then can begin to open up their perceptual awareness. And to me, this is what we're really doing as coaches. We're starting people on their hero's journey. We're catching them somewhere within their hero's journey. And most people get stuck right at the beginning of the hero's journey. They get stuck there because they want to deny their pain. They don't want to talk it. They don't want to own it as a story. They're embarrassed of it or whatever it is. And the first step is to see your pain is actually your superpower. Your pain holds the nugget of truth. This is the hero's journey. And by the way, this has been studied. And so if you're wondering where it's been studied, there's a technique called story editing in psychology that essentially has people do this for themselves, where they write out their pains, mainly done in PTSD research. They write out their pain just as it happens. And then they're told to now write forward into the future to describe how your pain made life better. And they're forced to see an angle by which they can make their life better. You and I sometimes, Danny, teach people when we're in courses about lateral thinking. This is a lateral thinking exercise, but it's more like a lateral living exercise, right? Lateral thinking is like, I have this cup, I can drink out of it. But if we think about and do a psychological experiment, we can say, well, what else can this cup be used for? Well, I could put soil in it and grow a plant, right? I could use it as a pencil holder. I could flip it upside down maybe and make some music with it or whatever, right? I can use it in other different ways that maybe you don't think about. That's essentially what we're doing by telling people their story in a slightly different way and dropping these little purpose nudges to get them to open up to the possibility that they can then get past this pattern to get on their hero's journey. And I think that's what essentially I'm doing, something like that.
I want to jump in real quick and tell you about one of my favorite new products. And to start out, I want to ask you a question. If you had to follow your friends around who are not the healthiest in the world and see what they are doing, what would be the number one thing you would probably tell them to do to start? For most people, that's going to be drinking more water, right? This is something that we talk about all the time in health and fitness. It's almost as if we think of it as an afterthought now because obviously water is so crucial. However, we oftentimes get this wrong. For example, did you know that when it comes to hydration, just drinking water can make things worse? Most people don't know this. Why? Partly because most people are over drinking water and under consuming the electrolytes that help water do its job. What we don't realize is that hydration is not just about water. It's about electrolytes, the minerals in there, as well as getting that water into the cells. And so you do not want to be over consuming water if you're not getting your electrolytes right. And this opens up a whole new discussion because most people are not getting their electrolytes right. For example, did you know that low sodium, too low sodium, is an issue? Just as much, if not more so, than high sodium. In other words, what we want if we're going to get the right electrolytes is to get the right amount of sodium and potassium and magnesium in the Goldilocks zone. We don't want too much. We don't want too little. We want it just right. This opens up a whole other thing here too, because people who are exercising, doing sauna therapies, doing low carb diets are disrupting and losing lots and lots of their electrolytes. For example, when insulin is not around in low carb diets, you will excrete lots of sodium. In other words, under that state, exercising, low carb diets, all these things, you actually need more sodium. And so if you're somebody who's been just drinking water, not paying attention to electrolytes, and also feeling fatigued, feeling like you're underperforming, not sleeping right, getting cramps, twitches, headaches, any of these things, then you are probably dealing with an electrolyte issue. This is where the product Element comes in. This product has been a game changer for me and many of my patients and clients. This is a rehydration electrolyte beverage, basically. It is a powder of electrolytes formulated with 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams magnesium without the added sugar and other nonsense that comes in beverages like Gatorade. This stuff is basically a rehydration beverage on steroids. It is the thing that is going to replenish your electrolytes in the right ratios, decrease fatigue, really correct chronic dehydration. And by the way, many people are dehydrating themselves, becoming hyponatremic, low sodium, when they're consuming too much water. You need your electrolytes on board, especially if you are someone who is losing lots of sodium and other electrolytes through low carb diets and lots of exercise. This is where Element comes in. Element is a new sponsor to the Next Level Human podcast. I cannot recommend this product enough. I have been using this stuff for months now, and I have immediately seen changes in my energy levels. I feel like I'm operating on a whole other level, and I have seen this as being the primary thing that people who have been using Element have been telling me, that their fatigue is getting better, especially fatigue that comes after very intense workouts that involve lots of sweating and lots of intense output from the nervous system. Please check out Element. Use the code NEXTLEVEL. DrinkElement.com. That's DrinkElement.com. DrinkElement.com, and let's get back to the show.
Dude, I didn't even realize that. That's exactly what you're doing, because the technique, right, and when you get any sort of coach training, you're going to come across motivational interviewing, and the key trait they teach you in that, and you mentioned in counseling as well, is summarize. Take everything they said, repeat it back to them. Is that what you said? Yeah, that's what I said. That's exactly right. It makes them feel listened to. It makes them feel cared for. And then they're able to open up more, and you're able to repeat that process. But you do take the possibility thinking and sprinkle it in there a little bit. And that's exactly what it is, because you do feel kind of charged up when you leave hanging out with you. You're like, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and starting at the next $1 million business right now. You do feel that charge up. So that's exactly what it is. That's good, man. That's all the questions I have for all the discussion topics anyway. Anything else you want to leave the Take Care folks with? Any final thoughts or anything you think coaches should just know or be aware of in general as we move forward an increasingly accessible world for coaches?
Yeah, I think I would add one more thing to this. And I think it really comes down to, again, I guess I'll do this same thing again. From my perspective, right, I think that there's a couple stories that I tell myself about the world. Now, here's the way I look at this. Whether a story is true or not doesn't matter, okay? Like, it could be just made up. But if it benefits and works for you in your life and it creates a difference in your clients, then use it. So here's a story I tell myself that I feel like makes my work really makes me feel charged up when I work with people. And maybe it'll be useful for your coaches who listen to this. The story I tell myself, and I believe this, it may or may not be true, but just try it on, everybody listening. I believe that there has never been another human like me who has ever walked the face of the earth in all the history of humanity. I believe that about Danny too, and I believe that about all of you. And I'm basing that off of just like, look at how different we are in our personalities and in our genetics and in our passions and our superpowers and in the pain that we experience. And that makes us unique. We're like this spiritual fingerprint in a sense. Not only do I believe that, but I don't believe there's ever going to be another human like me again, ever, that is specifically like me. I don't believe there's going to be another Danny Coleman ever again, nor do I believe any of you listening there will ever be another one of you again. And in that story that I tell myself, whether true or not, a possibility opens up that goes, wow, if that's the case, then it also means that I have something that I can give and only I can give. This is the beginning of purpose. And my hypothesis is that purpose is the highest form of behavior in the world that leads to the highest emotional state in the world, which to me is fulfillment, not happiness. There's a big difference to me between fulfillment and happiness. And so once you have that recognition about yourself and you carry that recognition into the client that you're working with as a coach, all of a sudden everything takes on a new meaning, because if you look and believe that and understand that, then you will be really interested in finding the unique story that makes that person the unique person who will never exist again and who has never existed at all. And in that, you can then uncover their special cargo, which I'm using that term to be synonymous with purpose. And in that, you can then slowly, subtly nudge them towards that particular purpose. And so I think it does start from that belief. And if you followed me there, the final thing I'll say on this discussion would be, I just planted a seed for all of you to think about, a very tangible seed for you to go, oh, that's interesting, right? Something that you can grab hold of. It's the same thing we must do with our clients. We have to plant those kinds of seeds in a tangible way, an illustrative way, so that they can go, I remember that, and it has stuck with me, and it has made a difference. And that's what we're doing. And you'll plant 1,000 seeds in your client, and none of them will grow, but one, right? Or 10,000 seeds and one will grow. And that's what you're doing. You're dropping these seeds around to help them unleash their special cargo. It's not just about getting rid of anxiety and depression or getting rid of these patterns in their life necessarily. It's helping them see that anxiety and depression are blocking them from something they need to do or confront. It's about the pattern and the lesson in the pattern, not getting rid of the pattern. And I do think a lot of coaches just go, this person has a problem. They've got this pattern, this obstacle. I just want to try to get rid of it. No, sometimes when you're coaching somebody, it's within the pattern and in the pain is the gem that they need, that insight that they need to glean to get to the next level. And I think we need to be aware of that because we oftentimes avoid those difficult, toughest conversations with our clients, because we don't want to stir up the pain. But there are ways to, really approach that in a way that empowers them to confront the pain and then move forward. And I think that's what we need to do. So this idea that there's never been anyone like Danny Coleman on the face of the earth, nor will there ever be. Same for Jade, Tita, same for all of you listening to this, same for every single client. If you can keep that in mind, then you start to now be very, very interested in the patterns, their pain, how they're handling them, and the different ways that they can move past them. And that would be the final thing that I would say.
Oh, I'm glad you ended on that, dude. It's a quote. It's kind of like the quote you always say that I love. I'll butcher it, of course, but it's essentially you're infinitely more powerful than you think and infinitely more insignificant than you think, all wrapped in one. And to me, that always charges me up. It doesn't shrink me down. It doesn't make me feel like nothing like nihilistic. It doesn't make me feel like nothing I do matters. It actually makes me feel like not only can I accomplish great things, also if I slip up along the way, it's really not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. So it's actually motivating to me, and it's sort of like you were saying there. So that's a perfect place to wrap it up. So my man, thanks for coming on Take Care Radio.
Love you, brother. Thanks for having me, man.
All right, Dr. Jade. See you, everybody.
See you guys.